Hey,
Hey Henry, how's it going?
it's good. How about you?
Yeah, not bad. It's a little wet and wild here in New Zealand at the moment.
Well, first of all, it's great to meet you, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk. I really appreciate it.
No worries.
How's life otherwise, besides it being wet and wild?
It's good. It's a little slow at the moment, but that's actually quite nice. After the last few months, I'm quite happy.
Yeah. Well, what I always like to start off with is how is it that you got started in your career? Was visual effects something you'd always wanted to do? Was it, were there certain impacts when you were younger that made you feel that way? Did you stumble into it? How did you get to where you are?
Yeah, how I got into visual effects was definitely a bit of a stumble, I would say. I've always been quite artistic, very much into photography and painting. And at school and college, that was where sort of I was heading. So I got on a design degree, studying graphic design. And while I was on that course, I started to get into more of the computer side of things, like learning to do website design and Photoshop and things like that. I didn't really know, wasn't really looking at the film industry at that point. And then we had this lecture from the son of the guy who ran the illustration course, who worked for a company called Mill Film, who had just won the Oscar for the work they did on Gladiator. And this lecture really was a turning point in my life. It completely opened my eyes to the fact that that this work was accessible, and not only that, that it happened in London. Not Hollywood, which is where I just assumed it all took place. And so after that lecture, I went and had a chat to, his name was Nick. I went and had a chat to Nick, and Nick said, "Yeah, if you want to get started in this industry, then get a job as a runner. That's how most people start out." So that summer, that's what I did. I went and got a job as a runner at the mill. And that gave me a really good overview of not just film, but there was also TV and commercial work happening at the company, so I could see both sides of things. And yeah, from that point onwards, I was like, that is what I want to do. And I went back to finish my final year at university, but I had to try and twist my graphic design degree to all be 3D animation based. I taught myself, because obviously the course was not geared towards 3D animation. And yeah, and after that, I graduated, got a job right out of college, and then moved straight to London, and I've been doing it ever since.
Was film at the time, either before or after, something where you really noticed the visual effects, or did that come later?
Uh, I think that came later. I wasn't when you sort of looking at it from an uninformed point of view, it's hard to know what's real, what's digital. I mean, you can make a guess, unless it's something very obvious. I think, but then as you start working within the industry, then you start to see the work more. Like you start to become more attuned to it, and then you start to recognize it and get familiar with it. I think I'd love to be able to go back to that, how I was on day one and be able to watch some of the movies of today. Because it's really hard to watch a film without starting to look at the work, to just be able to sit there and watch the film as the film.
Yeah. Did or let's see, what's the best way to put it? So visual effects is such a broad field, and so I was wondering because you've t done like where you've been a supervisor recently, like on Better Man and Thor, but then obviously you've had a progression. So I was wondering if you could sort of discuss some of the different roles that you've had over the years, just because I feel like I couldn't. If someone asked me, I couldn't explain them properly. So I was wondering if, being the expert that you are, if you could sort of break down, and we could talk about specific projects as well, but if you could maybe give us just like a little breakdown.
Yeah, so I mean, initially I started off in the TV commercials industry, and so in that space I did all the jobs, which was great. It was a really awesome way to sort of cut your teeth in that kind of in the visual effects industry, because it gives you a great overview of all the different jobs that you can do within that space. But the one that sort of really took me, the one that really appealed was doing digital lighting and rendering. So the best way to think about visual effects, there's two camps to it, I suppose. You've got 2D work and you've got 3D work. 2D work is, typically stuff where you're working with different photographic elements, different plates, painting out things, removing someone from the background, replacing this blue screen with something else. That's generally 2D based work. 3D based work is where you create something from scratch. So, whether it be a monster or a city or I don't know, cars chasing down a freeway, whatever. It's like, so I was always more drawn to that creation side of it. And the part that I really enjoyed was after someone had built and animated the thing, let's just say a car driving down a freeway, I would get it and I would be putting lights into the scene, much as the same way as a gaffer would on a film set, to try and match the lighting of my 3D component to the image that I'm putting that car into, making sure the sun direction is the same. And then there's, obviously what comes out the machines at the other end is a very raw image. It's perfectly sharp. It doesn't have grain on it. It doesn't have all the other components that you need to integrate it into the photography. And so you often have to produce a whole load of additional passes to help layer it in, whether you do a separate reflection pass or shadows that need to be put onto the road from the car, reflections of that car into other cars' windows. There's a whole load of additional pieces that you would have to output to then be able to pass over to the 2D department, who would take your 3D created car and then put it into the photography of the freeway.
Okay. And with films like, because we already just brought up Better Man and Thor, but then there are films maybe about 10 years ago like Hobbit, Hunger Games, and I'm just going from IMDb here, where it'll say you were a CG supervisor as opposed to a visual effects supervisor. Are those truly different roles in terms of what you're just saying? Are they?
Yeah. So within that same 2D, 3D split, a visual effects supervisor oversees both areas. All the work, the design work that goes into making the shots, and is ultimately responsible for the vision of that final image to present to either production side supervisor or the director, depending on which role you're in, to get sort of a buy-off on it. CG supervisor is primarily a supervisor on the 3D creation side of it. So it's a role where you're looking after people who are doing the work more than doing the work yourself. You're setting up the workflows. You're trying to work out how to be efficient, how to get consistency. Rather than getting one good-looking shot, you need to get the entire sequence looking the same, and a lot of diagnosing problems. It also gets a little bit technical. You can start writing tools to help people do their thing, and so that was kind of my career from pretty much X-Men First Class through to the end of The Hobbit. I think that was kind of the area where I did that. And then after that, I stepped up into the visual effects supervisor role, which is, more creative, more client relationship, client facing, and more about the overall vision than, as you sort of go through the hierarchy of visual effects, you get further and further away from the tools, which is one of the things I do actually try and keep my toe in the water, as it were, so that I can still jump on the box and do some things if I need to. I still output shots on Better Man, the Apes movies. Yeah, I still get my hands dirty from time to time.
And besides the challenge of consistency, what would you say are some of the most common, not problems, but could be challenges that you face? Is it budget reasons? Is it the amount of time that you have? And are you also typically working with the same crew or no? Or does it
No,
change?
usually a different crew. Sometimes people get very specific and say, I only want to work with these people. But I've always been of the mindset, it's one of the parts of the job I really enjoy is working with different teams, figuring out what their strengths are, and then playing to those strengths within the work. It's just sort of it's part of the challenge. I'd say the challenge is always probably more creative. Then there's a few technical ones. Obviously, budget and schedules, they always come into it, and that's just almost the constraints that you're bound by, I suppose. But really, it depends on what people want to do. Usually, if there's a very real and tangible thing that someone wants to do, like we shot the city, it's supposed to be New York City. There should be the Empire State Building in the background, but there's not. Can you put it back there? It's a very objective brief, let's say. Where it gets harder, I think, is where people aren't quite sure what they want. And so they just want you to show things and they'll know it when they see it, you know. And that's because that becomes a bit more of a black box as to what it could be. There's no rights or wrongs. It could be this, it could be that. Neither of them are incorrect. It's just down to what people feel and want. And I think that the skill is trying to understand what people's vision is and how to fulfill that, you know, how to bring that vision as quickly as possible and get on that same page, because that will build confidence and people will love the work, and you know it all grows from that.
And I'm always curious because with a film like Better Man, which is such a fantastic film in every respect, and I remember when it was announced, I was thinking this seems so strange,
Mm,
and I had no knowledge of Robbie Williams or anything, but it turned out to be this unexpected, gem,
mm.
and with him being portrayed as this monkey instead of himself, how do you go from a blank slate of how do we do this to the final image? Like, is that design coming from someone else of the production? Is that coming from your team and you're slowly piecing it together? Like, how does that final, let's call it monkey design, come to be?
Okay, so it usually starts from the production side. A character like Robbie, you know, there'll be concept artists who will do drawings and images, and they can work quite quickly and try different things out. And you know, they seem to tend to work in a space where the character is posed and you know in mid performance or something like that. They generally work through that process until they get something that they're happy with, and then they'll pass us that concept to start realizing it in the 3D space. But what invariably happens, and this is true on a number of shows I've worked on now, is the concept image is always one frame, one pose, one fraction of a second time, right? And when you try and extrapolate that out to a whole character, it invariably doesn't work, you know? So we bring that concept image into the 3D space. We start to sort of model, create the 3D mesh that will be Robbie. And then we start to look at it from different angles, and you know we start to animate it, and it doesn't have that same quality that that one still image had on day one. So at that point, that's where we will step in and be like, okay, you can't make the brows like this because we can't emote, you know, with them in that way. The jaw, he still has to be able to talk in a certain way, so we can't do this. The hairstyle is, whilst it's a transplant of his actual hairstyle, we have to kind of take that and adapt it into more of a simian kind of hairline. You know, there's a whole lot of different components that we have to sort of get in there and then start, almost, I say redesigning, but just massaging the design, let's say, so that it can actually function as a character in all the situations, rather than you know taking one concept image of one moment to every single moment within the movie. And so there's a bit of a translation process that sort of happens through there, and that's just something that you kind of learn through experience and you know and trial and error as well. You know, you try a lot of things out, and some things work and some things don't, and you know you keep the things that do and you lose the things that don't.
And because there is so much trial and error, and with you having talked about trying to give people what they want and not always being sure, are you being the supervisor? Are you in frequent collaboration with the director, or are
Absolutely. So with on Better Man, I was production side supervisor. So my point of contact or the person I will present to is the director. So we chatted frequently and a lot about things. Even if it was just something I was excited about that I wanted to show him, you know, I'd just send him a quick video off my phone. If it's if you're not the production side supervisor, then you would be presenting to the production side supervisor. So those are the sort of two scenarios. And yeah, your two clients, either the director or the production side supervisor. Yeah.
And this might sound like a stupid question, but for a monkey design, and you could even take the Planet of the Apes film. So,
Mhm.
what are you referencing to get it right? Are you actually looking at like videos, like pictures of monkeys? Like, how are you getting the realism of an actual animal correct, or let's say close to correct?
So a lot of reference. We've got a great relationship with Wellington Zoo. So we've been able to get up and close to a lot of the apes there, which has been great. That definitely helps in terms of some of the sort of detailed work. The character like Robbie, it's a bit of a hybrid because you've got part of it's modeled off of the actual Robbie Williams human, and part of it is that kind of simian physiology. And so I was kind of just trying to make a sort of a blend of the two and try and try where to lean more into the ape and where to lean more into Robbie. Like when we sort of got into the design, there were certain things that came up. Like Robbie's the first chimp we've ever created that has eyebrows, right? None of the Planet of the Apes movies, none of the chimps have eyebrows. And we did it because we wanted to lean into a likeness for him. But there's also an insane amount of emotion that comes from that area of the face, like just the eyes and the brows in general. And in order to sort of connect with all the human characters in the film, we went very human with this area, in terms of the shape, in terms of what they could do, and obviously adding eyebrows to them. Whereas other parts of the face, the muzzle, the ears, that all is a lot more leans a lot more closer to a chimpanzee. And so yeah, it's just sort of trying to find that character, but also keep one eye on reality the whole time, so make sure you're not drifting too far apart.
Have there been some big experiences or major kind of reflective moments in your career, like certain films or certain lessons learned where you're like, man, I'm really glad I went through that so I can know that for the next time? Or are there any films that were particularly, man, that was like blood, sweat, and tears to get this thing done in the right way? Is there anything that stands in the back of your mind as something like that, or they all kind of run together?
No, no, there's definitely highlights and lowlights. I'd say one of the highlights was definitely War for the Planet of the Apes. That was the third one with Matt Reeves. That the work that I did in that was there were four teams, and I was one of the four. And the work that we did was all the kind of the emotional traveling beats of the film. So I don't know how well you're familiar with it, but it's you've got the first act, and then there's a journey that they take when they eventually wind up at the colonel's camp, I suppose. And this work was all the big, heavy, emotional moments in the film. Like the work itself wasn't particularly, it wasn't explosions or some of the really complicated visual effects work. It was more about the performance, about the lighting, and about the photography, which are the sort of the three things which I absolutely love about the sort of the work. And we had such a great time doing that work. It was complicated, but the images that we were able to produce at the end of that, I'm still super proud of. And I think a lot of what we learned throughout that film definitely went on and influenced the approach that we took on Better Man. It was like that approach, but turned up to 11. As for the low points, like I probably won't mention any of those by names, but
Yeah.
but there's just I think it's where there's usually things where things have not been very well planned out from the start, and filmmakers try and pivot and go off in a different direction, but it's always very close to the end of the deadline, and it always compromises the work. It always ends up being very frustrating. You have to think on your feet and problem solve, but you always end up feeling like compromised a little bit. Like it wasn't as good as it could have been if that had been the idea on day one instead of 3 weeks before the deadline. So no.
Yeah. having worked on, because I mean, they're all sort of in the action genre. Is there a style, a subgenre within that you really like? Is it work doing stuff like the Simian stuff? Is it doing kind of more Marvel sci-fi futuristic stuff? Is there any kind of genre styles that you get even more excited to be a part of?
Yeah, I mean it's funny because visual effects bread and butter is sci-fi, action, fantasy. You know, that's 90% of the movies that people note for visual effects probably came out of those genres. But the work that I enjoy the most is actually the sort of the stuff where people don't know, don't realize. You know, you wouldn't necessarily say this is a visual effects movie because, or most movies have visual effects in them, but most people wouldn't pay any attention to it. You know, your work supports the storyline. It's not there for spectacle. It's literally there, you know, to sort of aid the narrative, and that's the, and so not genre specific, but that definitely type of work. There's a lot of films today that have visual effects work in them, and you know most people don't even realize, and that's the kind of stuff which I love doing. So
Is that like if there's something that you wish more people knew about visual effects? Because now, like you're just saying, visual effects have become kind of quote unquote normal. Like
mm.
it's you don't like going to a big movie, there's going to be a bunch of special effects, but is there anything that you wish uh that the average moviegoer knew about either the work itself or about the world of visual effects? Anything come to mind in that way?
Not really. I mean, the one thing I will say is, I think when people notice visual effects work in films, it's probably only about 20% of the actual work that goes into these films, you know. And people also tend to remember either the stuff that's incredibly obvious and great or terrible, you know.
Mm.
And there's a whole chunk of stuff in the middle that will fly past on screen, and most people won't even realize that that was a visual effects shot. And you know, some good examples in Better Man. There's a scene which takes place when you know Rob comes home from seeing his dad when he finds out he's first got into the band, and we shot that in Melbourne. It was you know on a sound stage. They built the front facades of just three houses, Robbie's, and then either side of Robbie. Everything else is being created afterwards. The whole street is digital. The cars are digital. Most people will watch that scene and will have no idea that we didn't shoot it on a street in the UK. You know, and so in many respects, I actually think the better job that I do, the less people notice, the better is the job that I've done, you know? So in some respects, I want people to notice less than things to know than to notice more. Yeah.
It's almost that kind of reminds me of like editing because most, I mean, there's certain exceptions with editing, but I feel with editing, sometimes the best kinds are the ones you don't notice. You don't want to be thinking, oh, they cut
Mm,
to a new scene or something like that, you know?
yeah.
Um, but are there any films from the last handful of years that the visual effects in whatever respect
Mm.
stand out to you? Like, are you a typical moviegoer or like a frequent
Yeah.
moviegoer?
No, I am. I watch a lot of film, and I'm part of the Academy as well. So, you know, we get to see a lot of screeners and obviously vote in the awards. Standout visual effects movies, Gravity is definitely one of them. There's only a handful of movies I can remember going to the cinema, the film finishing, and me wanting to walk right back out to the box office, buy another ticket, and go and watch it again. And Gravity was one of those films. Like it was definitely, you know, that was one where the visual effects were right there. You know, you could see them the whole time, but they, like I was saying earlier, they totally engrossed you in the story, and you know, you got taken along for the ride. To what I was saying even earlier about, you know, how I wish I could watch films these days without that visual effects eye. I think when you do see a film where you don't notice it because the film's narrative has taken hold of you by so much that you don't even get a chance to notice it, and Gravity definitely fell into that camp. That was incredible work, and yeah, definitely one of the standouts. The other ones I really enjoyed, Ex Machina, which is another one, which came out a few years ago now. Again, not visual effects as a spectacle, definitely supporting the narrative, beautifully executed, and yeah, just incredible work. I think the stuff which both those films in particular have very unique and kind of individual personalities, I suppose. They're not forming part of a larger franchise. There's not going to be 10 sequels that follow them. They tend to exist as their own thing. And I think those are the sorts of films which I really really enjoy.
Yeah, and those two movies I think I would definitely be on my list as well because I remember Gravity I saw that's one of the few like you're saying I remember I saw that in IMAX. I remember where I was, and that experience was so incredible.
Mm,
And then with Ex Machina, that's such a smaller budget movie,
yeah.
A24 film, and yet you completely believe that you're looking at an AI robot. And I think
Mm,
that's the amazing thing about the effects, like with Planet of the Apes or with Betterman, is you're never questioning it. I'm like, okay,
mm,
that's an ape I'm watching on screen,
yeah.
or at least as close as your mind can truly
Mm.
believe that. But, um, well, uh, really, just the last thing I have is there anything else upcoming? Anything on the horizon? Or are you typically aware of what project might be next? Is there much of a waiting period?
No, I mean, I was very recently attached to a project, but unfortunately that went on hold. So yeah, it might come back. I don't know. So I'm sort of in a process of just sort of regrouping and seeing what's out there. There was definitely a bit of a lull from the writer's strike and the actor strike, and then we're sort of we're past that now, and all the projects that kind of got tripped up by those strikes are now starting to get back into production, and so things are actually getting busier again. So I think it's a very good time to be available. Put it that way. Yeah.
That's good.
Mm.
Well, Luke, I really do again appreciate you talking. I feel like I've learned just in the short time a lot about the visual effects world, and you've been a part of so many films that I really love, and those visual effects are something that have really wowed me and are one of the reasons why I love those movies. So I really appreciate the work and that your team in all different respects do because it's an amazing field and amazing work.
Awesome. No, thank you, Henry. Appreciate the chat.
All right, take care.
Have a good